In May of 1944, the Nazis loaded a 15-year-old Jewish boy named Elie Wiesel into a cattle car along with his parents and 3 sisters and shipped them east from their small Romanian town to Auschwitz. His mother and his youngest sister were gassed the night they arrived. He and his father were marched into the slave labor camps, and his father died at Buchenwald on January 29, 1945, weeks before the Americans liberated it. Elie was 16 years old. He had buried his entire family in his mind, and most of his pre-existing ideas of God with them. More than a decade later, he wrote about it in a small book called Night. Toward the middle of the book, there's a scene on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, when 10,000 inmates of the camp gathered to pray. Elie was among them, but for the first time in his life, he could not join. He writes this: "My eyes had opened, and I was alone, terribly alone in a world without God, without man, without love or mercy. I was nothing but ashes now, but I felt myself to be stronger than this Almighty, to whom my life had been bound for so long." That is one of the saddest sentences ever written by a believer about God. The memoir ends with Elie, freshly liberated and sick in a hospital, dragging himself to a mirror for the first time since he'd been deported. He had not seen his own face in over a year. The last sentences of the book, referring to his own image in the mirror, are these: "From the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. The look in his eyes as he gazed at me has never left me." The boy who walked out of Buchenwald was not the boy who had walked into Sigurd's synagogue 4 years earlier. The innocent faith of his childhood did not survive the brutality of the camp. Night stands as one of the truest records anyone has ever left of the damage senseless suffering can do to a person's faith. Most of us, mercifully, will never know anything close to what Elie Wiesel knew. The Holocaust is its own moral category, and we don't ever want to flatten it into a metaphor for ordinary suffering. But as the Scottish minister Ian McLaren wrote in 1897, we all ought to be kind to one another, because every person we meet is fighting a hard, hidden battle. I don't know about you, but the longer I live, the more sure I am that McLaren was right. Most of us had to work through the pain and silence of an unanswered prayer, or losing a person we cared about to rejection, betrayal, or death. And almost everyone you sit next to in traffic or stand behind in a line is carrying a smaller version of the suffering Elie wrote about in his memoir. And the feeling when it comes is hauntingly similar: alone, in a world without love or mercy. I'm not going to pretend that the Bible gives clear, uncomplicated answers to what happened at Auschwitz, because it does not. But there's a scene in the Gospel of John that's been helpful to me in my own seasons of pain and confusion, and I want to walk through it with you. Jesus had 3 close friends in the village of Bethany, all siblings named Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. They were Jewish, just as Elie Wiesel and also Jesus himself were Jewish. When Lazarus became seriously ill, his sisters sent the word, "Lord, the one you love is sick." They knew their brother Lazarus as the one that Jesus especially loved. They did not tell Jesus what to do, and they did not even ask. They assumed that he would come quickly to them because he'd healed strangers with a word. So surely he would drop everything for a close friend like Lazarus. But Jesus did not do that. The text in John 11 reports it this way: "So when Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was." That word "so" is extremely unsettling. It does not say, "but Jesus stayed." It says, "so Jesus stayed." He loved them, and therefore he waited long enough for Lazarus to die and long enough to miss the funeral. By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead and buried for 4 days. Mary and Martha met him separately, and they both registered the same complaint, word for word: "Lord, If you had been here, my brother would not have died." Their complaint was not a sign of unbelief. It was wounded faith. They were trying to hold together two things that felt impossible to reconcile: what they knew about Jesus' love and what they were experiencing as Jesus' silence. Their grief, lament, and even complaint were not disrespectful to Jesus. They were signs of relationship. People who do not trust God do not usually bring their pain to God, but Job did. David did again and again in the Psalms. And here, Martha and Mary do too. That may be why Jesus does not begin by correcting their theology. He does not launch into an explanation. He weeps with them. Before he reveals his power, he shares their sorrow. And then, after entering fully into the grief of that moment, Jesus does something no one expected. He stands before the tomb and calls Lazarus out. Tim Keller preached on John chapter 11 at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City the Sunday after September 11, 2001. The services were filled with people who'd watched the towers collapse 5 days earlier, and some had lost friends and family in the wreckage. Keller did not soften the message. He said this: "Jesus does not say, 'If you trust in me, someday I'll take you away from all of this.' He does not say, 'Someday if you believe in me, I will take you to a wonderful paradise where your soul will be able to forget about all of this.' I don't want a place like that right now. I'm upset and mad about what we have lost. But Jesus Christ does not say he will give us consolation. He says he is giving us resurrection. Resurrection rather than consolation. That's the difference between what we instinctively wish for and what Jesus has actually come to give. Consolation patches up what's broken and helps us keep going. Resurrection promises that what death has stolen, killed, and destroyed will be given back to us, not replaced, but restored. The cross of Christ becomes our gateway to mercy, and his empty tomb becomes our proof. C.S. Lewis put the same thought in the mouth of George MacDonald in The Great Divorce. They say of some temporal suffering, no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn even that agony into a glory. This is the promise Christ makes to those who walk with him. Not that our suffering will be neatly explained, but that it will be taken up into glory and transformed by it, just like a broken bone. Once it heals properly, will be stronger than it ever was before the break. The agony itself will be made beautiful by a God who is patient enough even to redeem time itself. As Tolkien famously wrote in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, everything sad will come untrue. I've stood in the wreckage of my own pain and sorrow. Nothing like a death camp or a war zone, but I have stood over prayers that seemed to disappear into the ceiling, and over losses that did not heal on any timetable I would have chosen, and some losses that won't heal completely until heaven. What I have found, slowly and imperfectly, is that when God delays and doesn't let us in on why, it's not because he's indifferent to our waiting. It's the opposite of that. He's not. Our long seasons of unanswered prayer actually turn out to be the place where our faith is deepened and where we learn what it means to belong, body and soul, to a Savior who does not abandon his people. If you are in a season where the answer you have been pleading for has not come, you are not outside of God's story. You're inside it, standing where Mary and Martha stood on the road near Bethany. The Jesus who wept with them is the same Jesus who weeps with you. He does not always show up when or in the way we ask, but he does always show up. I can't speak for what happened in the heart of a 15-year-old Jewish boy on a Rosh Hashanah night in a German death camp in 1944. No one can. But I do know what's true in every season and circumstance. The God Elie Wiesel felt abandoned by was not a stranger to abandonment. The God of his fathers had himself become a Jewish man, born in a small town not unlike Saget. And that Jewish man walked into the tomb of Lazarus 4 days late and wept there with two sisters who had said exactly the kinds of things Elie was saying. And on a hill outside Jerusalem, that same Jewish man hung on a Roman cross and cried out in the Aramaic words of the psalmist, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? The God who seemed absent from Auschwitz is the God who has been into the silence ahead of every one of us and who came out on the other side of it on the third day. What I can offer to you on this side of the silence is what Jesus said to Martha on the road outside Bethany. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me, Jesus said, shall never die. And then he asked her a question that he also asks of us. Do you believe this?